Why are so many Europeans embracing Islam? A defiant search for truth in a fractured world. In the heart of a continent that once sent crusaders to the east, built cathedrals that scraped the skies, and prided itself on Enlightenment rationalism, a quiet revolution is underway. It doesn't wave flags. It doesn't riot in the streets. It doesn't even ask for your approval. It happens in bookstores, in living rooms, in late-night YouTube rabbit holes, in prison cells, and in the deep, unspoken ache that modernity has failed to soothe. Yes, Europeans are converting to Islam, not in trickles, but in numbers significant enough to make governments ponder, media speculate, and society bristle with confusion, fear, or outright denial. But this is no accident. This is no temporary trend. This is not just about migrants or marriages. It is above all about disillusionment with modernity, with nihilism, with a civilization that has forgotten its soul while boasting of its technological prowess. Let's be clear, the people converting are not all poor, ignorant, or oppressed. That stereotype is as tired as it is lazy. These are university students, ex-atheists, former churchgoers, feminists, artists, former soldiers, and CEOs. Some were born into wealth, some into hardship. But what binds them together is that they asked a question modern Europe no longer knows how to answer. What is the point of all this? The hollow promise of modern freedom. Europe has become the temple of secularism. It worships liberty, progress, science, and autonomy. But for many, the freedom to do anything has become the freedom to be nothing. The result? A population drowning in anxiety and depression and addiction, despite having everything previous generations could only dream of. What if, they ask, this freedom is actually a prison? What if the relentless pursuit of self-pleasure, material success, and personal autonomy is not liberation, but spiritual suicide? Enter Islam, not as a foreign religion, but as a mirror held up to a spiritually famished West. It speaks with unapologetic clarity. There is one God. Life has purpose. Morality is not subjective. The human being is sacred. You are not a random accident. You are accountable. You matter. This message doesn't come with 500 disclaimers. It doesn't beg to be liked. It doesn't fear being called backward. And perhaps that's precisely why it resonates. In a world allergic to absolutes, Islam offers certainty. Beyond the headlines, a private revolution. Turn off the news. Forget the caricatures. Behind the media's obsession with extremism, hijabs, and so-called Islamization, something deeper is happening, something more intimate. A young man in Paris reads the Quran secretly in his room, stunned by its rhythm and repetition. A woman in Berlin, disillusioned with hookup culture, finds peace in modesty and prayer. A professor in Stockholm begins to fast during Ramadan just to try and ends up weeping on the prayer mat one dawn, overwhelmed by a presence she never thought she'd believe in. They don't scream about it. They don't always announce it, but they feel it. For the first time in their lives, they feel whole. And let's not ignore the irony. In countries where Islam is demonized, its truth spreads fastest. Why? Because pressure creates curiosity, hatred creates investigation, and the Quran, once read, has a strange tendency to turn doubters into disciples. Feminism's unexpected ally. One of the most unexpected trends is the number of European women converting to Islam. Why would women, raised on the gospel of sexual liberation and individualism, turn to a religion often accused of being patriarchal? Because many have discovered that the promises of third-wave feminism were hollow. They were told they'd find empowerment in shedding their clothes, chasing careers, and rejecting traditional roles. Instead, many found burnout, objectification, and existential fatigue. Islam, to their astonishment, didn't oppress them, it honored them. It provided clarity, dignity, and a structure that didn't pit them against their femininity, but celebrated it. A woman in Amsterdam once said, "I didn't convert to escape freedom. I converted because I was tired of pretending I was happy being free." The death of the Church, the birth of a new faith. Christianity, Europe's once sacred cornerstone, is in freefall. The grand cathedrals stand empty. The priests preach to pews filled with dust. It's not that people hate God. They just stopped believing the Church had anything real to offer. Scandals, institutional hypocrisy, and a softening of doctrine have left the Church spineless, more concerned with being relevant than being righteous. Islam, by contrast, does not bend with the wind. It does not evolve to suit popular opinion, and for many, this is its greatest strength. When every institution in Europe seems to be selling out, Islam stays stubbornly rooted. In fact, some converts were once devout Christians. They didn't leave faith because they stopped believing in God. They left because their religion had become a social club, vague, confused, and neutered. When they read the Quran, they found the God that they had once yearned for, majestic, merciful, and unyielding in justice. A former journalist from the UK put it bluntly, "They told me Islam was dangerous. They were right. It was dangerous to my ego, my selfishness, and my illusions, but it was the best danger I ever encountered." Islam in the prison, in the classroom, in the cafe. The revolution is not taking place in mosques alone. It is unfolding in the least expected places. In European prisons, where violence and hopelessness often reign, Islam is becoming a lifeline. Inmates, once swallowed by gang culture or addiction, are turning to the Quran, not out of desperation, but discovery. They find discipline in prayer, self-control in fasting, and purpose in the stories of prophets who fell and rose again. They find a new code, not just of belief, but of honor. Many of these men and women leave prison not only reformed, but reborn, clean, committed, and carrying a sense of identity the system had stripped from them. Meanwhile, in elite universities, Oxford, Sorbonne, Leiden, Heidelberg, philosophy majors and political theorists are quietly studying Islamic theology on the side. They wrestle with Kant, Nietzsche, and Foucault in class, then go home and read Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Ghazali, or Sayyid Nursi. Why? Because postmodern theory, with all its complexity, offers no anchor, only endless doubt. Islam, in contrast, offers a framework where logic and faith are not enemies, but allies, where revelation doesn't cancel reason, but completes it, where meaning is not relative, but radiant and real. Even in Europe's bustling cafes, those smoky, liberal hubs where atheism once reigned supreme, young men and women are now sipping espresso while discussing Islamic ethics, Sufi metaphysics, and the miracles of the Quran. It's not rare to see a hijabi woman discussing Rumi and Hegel in the same breath, or a reformed clubber explaining why tahajjud prayer changed his life more than any nightclub ever did. This is not a rejection of intellect, it is its resurrection. The West's search for sacred stillness. Let's say what few dare to say out loud. The West is spiritually exhausted. It has tried everything: sex, drugs, therapy, technology, travel, yoga, self-help books, psychedelics. But none of it fills the void. None of it answers the aching questions people whisper in the quiet of the night. Who am I? Why am I here? Why does anything matter? Islam doesn't answer these questions with poetry or positive affirmations. It answers them with fire, with conviction, with a comprehensive worldview that doesn't ask you to float in ambiguity, but to submit to something higher, holier, eternal. This submission to the modern European mind sounds like oppression, but many are finding it to be the very thing that sets them free, free from narcissism, free from consumerism, free from the crushing burden of self-deification. They no longer want to be gods. They want to worship one. Islam, the last rebellion. In a Europe that celebrates rebellion but punishes nonconformity, Islam is the last true act of resistance. When society says, "Do what you want," the Muslim says, "I will do what is right." When culture says, "There is no truth," the Muslim says, "There is only one truth." When media says, "Be yourself, no matter what," the Muslim says, "I will discipline myself, no matter the cost." This is rebellion, not for the sake of chaos, but for the sake of clarity. Not a teenage tantrum, but a conscious, principled revolt against a civilization that has lost the plot. One convert described it best: "I didn't become Muslim to be accepted. I became Muslim because I was tired of lying to myself. I wanted to live for something bigger than me, and I found it in Islam." They were told it was a desert, but found a garden. The European mind has been conditioned to see Islam as an outdated, foreign, and hostile force, a relic from the sands of Arabia, incompatible with European identity. Yet what many are finding, once they set foot on its soil, is not a barren desert, but a garden, lush, ordered, serene. In this garden, prayer is not a ritual of fear, but an encounter of love. Fasting is not self-torture, but self-mastery. The hijab is not a cage, but a crown. The Quran is not a rule book, it is a revelation. This realization hits hard. It deconstructs everything they've been told, and it forces them to ask the ultimate question. If they were wrong about Islam, what else were they wrong about? The elephant in the room. What if it's true? At the end of all arguments, after the debates on geopolitics, gender roles, science, and sociology, there remains one haunting question. What if Islam is actually true? Not culturally enriching, not philosophically interesting, not socially useful, but divinely revealed. This is the question many Europeans deep down are beginning to take seriously. And once that question is taken seriously, everything changes. Because if Islam is true, then it doesn't matter how unpopular it is. It doesn't matter how much it is misunderstood. It doesn't matter how much it is attacked, mocked, or feared. If it's true, then it is the single most important thing any human being could ever encounter. And that, perhaps, is why they convert. Not because they want to be different, not because they are lost, not because they hate the West, but because, in a world of noise, Islam whispers truth, and they dared to listen. From the gutter to the grave of the ego, stories of transformation. The rapper in Marseille. Youssef was once known as El Enfer on the underground rap scene, French Algerian, raised by the streets, baptized by violence. His lyrics glorified drugs, money, and chaos. But at the height of his fame, something broke. His best friend died in a gang shooting. Another committed suicide. Youssef fell into a spiral. One night, sleepless and stoned, he stumbled across a Quranic recitation video online. He didn't understand the words, but something pierced him. He wept for hours. A week later, he reached out to a local imam. Today, he performs nasheeds, teaches Quran to ex-cons, and has completely disappeared from the music scene. He once rhymed about hell. Now, he lives to avoid it. The feminist from Norway. Hannah was a PhD candidate in gender studies in Oslo, vocal in LGBTQ advocacy, and an avowed atheist. Her thesis was on the liberation of the female body through public nudity. She discovered Islam ironically while writing a critique of the hijab. What she intended as a hit piece became an obsession. She read the Quran, hadiths, Islamic feminist theory. She met practicing Muslim women. They weren't brainwashed. They were sharp, serene, centered. Slowly, her ideas about freedom collapsed. She converted in secret, afraid to lose her academic standing. Today she wears a hijab in public, left her PhD, and teaches modest fashion online. "I thought Islam would silence me," she said. "It gave me a voice I'd never known." The ex-skinhead in Poland. Kamil grew up hating Muslims. He was a neo-nationalist in Warsaw, attended marches waving crosses and shouting slurs. He blamed immigrants for crime, Islam for terrorism, and Muslims for the decay of Polish culture. Then he met a Muslim, Abdul, a refugee from Syria, during a construction job. Abdul didn't argue. He worked hard, prayed quietly, fasted during summer heat waves. Slowly, Kamil's hatred cracked. Curiosity bloomed. One day, he asked about Islam. Abdul invited him to the mosque. 3 years later, Kamil is now Karim, married to a Bosniak woman, and campaigns against hate speech. His old comrades call him a traitor. He calls himself free. Social impact, a new Europe rising from within. These aren't isolated anomalies, they are foreshocks of a seismic shift. In cities like London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Berlin, Islam is not an import. It's becoming native, not in skin color, but in belief, behavior, and belonging. Mosques are growing while churches shrink. Friday prayers spill out onto sidewalks while Sunday Mass echoes through empty pews. Ramadan is mainstream. Halal food is standard. Hijabis are lawyers, journalists, professors. The face of Islam in Europe is not just immigrant, it is European. This rebirth is creating both hope and tension. Converts become bridges between cultures, dispelling fear, modeling integration, teaching resilience. But they also expose the emptiness of Europe's secular promises. They embody the uncomfortable truth that maybe, just maybe, Europe needs Islam more than Islam needs Europe. Yet this growing presence raises big questions for the state. Political implications, the rising tide that terrifies power. 1. The identity crisis intensifies. What does it mean to be European now? If a Frenchman named Pierre becomes Abdul and starts fasting, wearing a thobe, and praying 5 times a day, does he stop being French, or has France simply evolved? This debate is raging in parliaments and pubs alike. Right-wing politicians call it Islamization. Leftists struggle to reconcile their secular values with religious freedom. The center collapses in confusion. 2. Policy versus piety. Governments introduce hijab bans, minaret restrictions, halal meat limitations. They target mosques with surveillance. They brand conservatism as extremism. Yet none of it stops conversions. It only reinforces the idea that Islam stands firm while governments bend in fear. 3. Security narratives are collapsing. For decades, Muslim equals suspect was the lazy logic. Now, intelligence agencies are watching European converts, not because they are threats, but because they're disrupting the entire narrative. They're not radical, they're rational, educated, eloquent, and free. And they're growing. 4. Islam as a political force. Muslims are increasingly organized, running for office, influencing local councils, launching media platforms, schools, charities. Converts play a key role. They speak the language of both worlds. They have one foot in Islamic orthodoxy and one in Western discourse. That fusion is powerful, and it's only getting louder. Conclusion: the return to meaning. So why are so many Europeans converting to Islam? Because they've tried everything else. They've had their fill of capitalism, consumerism, therapy, and rebellion. They've bathed in ideologies, choked on philosophies, overdosed on freedom. They've wandered through spiritual wastelands only to find at the heart of Islam a truth so unapologetically complete it terrifies and attracts all at once. Islam doesn't beg for your approval. It invites your submission, not as defeat, but as liberation. And in a Europe where everything is negotiable, where truth is always up for debate, that kind of certainty is not only rare, it's revolutionary. The converts are not traitors to Europe. They are a reminder of what Europe lost: faith, reverence, discipline, transcendence. They're not abandoning the West. They're trying to rescue its soul, even if the West doesn't know it yet. What we're witnessing is not a cultural shift. It's not demographic. It's not political. It is spiritual. It is quiet. It is vast. And it is only beginning. The desert is blooming. The garden is growing. And in the echo of a fading civilization, the Adhan rises. Allahu Akbar. Not just a call to prayer, but a call to awakening.